is my presentation about the variability in affective resting state networks undergoing transient affective stimuli. First, we started on the fact that resting state networks present ongoing spontaneous brain activities during rest identified traditionally by seed-based correlation analysis and independent component analysis. Also, such resting state networks reflect the organization of a series of highly coherent functional networks. Mm, when we looked at the literature, we found that other studies have been focused on brain activity at rest modulated by preceding stimuli as well. We also find that some of these studies included emotional challenges in their task. And finally, regarding specifically to the index as of functional connectivity, it is clear that it is not the first time that degree centrality is used as a functional connectivity metric. For instance, we can just quote some of these studies that made the same. I mean, use degree centrality as a index for functional connectivity. However, at least to our knowledge, it is the first time that brain connectivity after emotional task is explored with longer resting state periods through or using degree centrality maps. And when I'm talking about these longer resting state periods, for instance, I make reference to one study made by Erilmas in 2011. He used a quite similar paradigm. I mean, rest task rest paradigm. We will discuss and explain more in detail later on. And he also used emotional challenge on his study, but the difference was that the resting periods on this study took only 90 seconds. Okay, so the contribution for the present study goes on two directions. First, we implemented a new approach for functional connectivity preceding emotional task, and second, this will shed light also on understanding how transient emotional tasks influence resting state networks over time. And for that, we had a hypothesis, which was that sad events will change brain activity during resting state, even after the end of the sadness-inducing movie. What I mean is that variability or the variability of the resting state networks could be understood as a function of the induced stimuli. So, based on this hypothesis, we also had two more questions. First, is do transient negative emotion influence subsequent spontaneous brain activity at rest? I mean, if it is true that there is any change or modulation on the resting state networks caused by these previous stimuli, how does it happen? The second question is how transient emotion influence subsequent brain response over time. And what I'm asking here is whether how or how this influence occurs in terms of time. I mean, one example, if after presenting one stimuli and we analyze the resting state, we appreciate a carryover effect. The first question will be, does it recover again to the baseline? And if it happens, how it happens? I mean, does it happen in terms of time, of minutes or seconds? And for that, we use a paradigm design, as just mentioned before, which consisted on a baseline of 10 minutes. Then, I mean, all the scanning session took 60 minutes. All these, we used 26 healthy male subjects, um, and we collected the data on an fMRI scanner, but simultaneously, we also recorded EEG data Of course, for this research work, we only took into account the fMRI data. But apart of that, we also recorded the physiological data, such as cardiac pulse and respiration. And we had also, or the participants had a visual analog scale in order to rate the arousing of their emotions produced by the movies. Okay, so let me just go before and I will explain you even more in detail how it works. So after the baseline, we presented the subjects a neutral movie. For that, we used the sounds room. We made a video clip of 5 minutes. Then we again measured a resting period. It is a 15 minutes resting period. And subsequently, we presented the subject one more movie, a sad movie, and for that we used 21 grams. Again, a 5 minutes video clip, and after that, one more resting period of 15 minutes. So during these movies, the presentation of these video clips, the subjects were able to rate their feelings, the arousing of their feelings. How strong was the emotion elicited by this movie? And for that, they had on the right hand a mouse, and they can just with a scale from 0 to 9 evaluate how strong the feeling was. Um, and these figures exactly shows that a moment-to-moment rating of arousal during this movie, as such as I said, and a pair sample t-test was done every 30 seconds. I'm talking about the analysis, of course. And if a time point survive the Bonferroni correction, a star is plotted, such as we can see here. And what we can infer from this plot is that the first 90 seconds of presented the stimuli, absolutely nothing happened, which makes sense because at the very beginning, absolutely nothing happened in both scenes. I mean, in both in the neutral and the sad movie. Um, this figure validates that subjects experience a higher arousing during the sad movie than during the neutral movie. Okay, and as a conventional resting state fMRI study, we pre-processed the data, and first of all, we made a physiological denoising for cardiac pulse and respiration. For that, we use a rhetoric core and RVHR core algorithm. It was provided by Kari Chang, and what it makes is to diminish their effects, the effects of cardiac pulse and respiration on both signals. Then we made the pre-processing itself, and first we made a slice timing correction, which is used to synchronize the signals in sequential slices within a brain volume. Second, we made the realignment, which works as a motion corrector, especially for head movement. Third, we have the signal regression that reduces the physiological noise from white matter, CSF, and 6 head movements parameters. I'm talking about the translation and rotation. Fourth, we have the trend and filtering, which also contributes to the physiological denoising by removing linear thread and filtering data to the infralow frequency band. I'm talking about the range of 0.01 to 0.08. Fifth, we have a normalization that is used to map a functional image to a template so that we can compare brains across different participants. And lastly, we smoothed the data, which is basically to apply a small blurring kernel cross image to average part of the intensities from neighboring voxels. Together it improves the signal to noise ratio. So, very short smoothing step improves the signal to noise ratio. This is the procedure for pre-processing the data in order to get to analyze the functional connectivity through the degree centrality as an index. And when we do something like that, we always have to follow some steps, some very basic steps. For instance, we treat each voxel as a node. Then the voxel-wise functional connectivity calculation is used by a Pearson's correlation, and a correlation coefficient should be larger than 0.25 in order to be considered as an edge. And then what we get are two different degree centrality maps. The first one, it's called binary degree centrality, which is the number of edge. And second, the weighted degree centrality, which is the sum of the strength of positive edge. Finally, these degree centrality maps are Z-transformed for analysis at group level. What we can see here is a summary of all the procedure. However, it is important to keep in mind that when we ask about the consequence or the possible modulations of resting state networks caused by previous stimuli, implicitly we're asking about the interaction between this stimuli, in this case the emotional stimuli, and time, because the idea is trying to understand what happens with these resting state networks over time. Okay, and for that we treat the data on two different ways. As we can see here in this graph, on A, what I want to represent is that we just collected the data, we pre-processed the data, such as I explained before, and in the first situation, we just took all this data in one block, one segment, and we made the functional connectivity matrix. Then we established the hubs, and then we just proceeded with the statistical analysis. The second case is that after pre-processing the data, we applied a sliding window analysis on this data, and which means that we temporarily segmented the data. So, for instance, if the resting state periods had a length of 15 minutes, we made three time windows. Each of them had a 5 minutes length. Then we made the functional connectivity matrix again, we established the hubs, and then proceeded with the statistical analysis. And for this statistical analysis, first of all, we made a pair t-test. And for this purpose, what we took was the different conditions. Let me back to the paradigm to explain that. We have the baseline, the resting passive, and the rest active period. And for the t-test, we compared these different conditions. For instance, rest stat versus rest neutral, and rest stat versus baseline. We used fMRI software for that, and we applied two different thresholds. First, we used the FDR uncorrected and cluster size greater than 10, p-value smaller than 0.001, and the second threshold was FDR cluster corrected, p-value smaller than 0.05. Again, K cluster size greater than 10 voxels. Interestingly, when we analyze the data without a sliding window, we got no information. I mean, there was no significant brain activation. But when we did exactly the same with the sliding window analysis, we found that some brain areas survived, especially the FDR uncorrected threshold, such as we can see here. Nevertheless, besides the pair t-test analysis, we also made a full factorial ANOVA analysis. For that, we had two factors. The first one was the transient emotions, which had two levels, rest sad and rest neutral. The second factor was time, which has three levels. I'm talking about the window one, the window from 5 to 10 minutes, second window from 10 to 15, and third the window from 10, I'm sorry, the 10 for 15 minutes. Yeah, the first one is the 0 to 5 minutes. So we apply the ANOVA, and when we apply the ANOVA, only the IFG brain area survived the FDR cluster corrected p-value smaller than 0.05. What was very interesting for us that was that this brain area appeared in both binary and weighted degree centrality maps, which is just to validate that the difference. I mean, if we go to the literature, some authors say that weighted degree centrality could be a little bit more stable, but at least according to our results, the difference between both maps could be very subtle. Okay. Then we also examined the interaction of transit set emotion, address, and time. But for this second analysis, or let's say third, we just pay attention at the ROI level, and for that, we took this IFG brain area as a ROI, and then we extracted the time series of this ROI in the three conditions. I mean, after SAT, resting state after SAT, resting after neutral, and baseline. And we found that there was a significant interaction between both passive and active resting state, especially the time curve of the degree centrality after neutral movie resembles that in the baseline condition, while the time curve of degree centrality after the SAT movie showed a positive shift. This is nicely appreciated in the second window. I'm talking about the 5 to 10 minutes window. And but we wanted to know whether this pattern could be um, repetitive, or we can appreciate it on more window analysis. And for that, we again took the data and we made new slide windows, this time not by 5 minutes length windows, but by 3 minutes length. That's why we have in this case 3 windows. And interestingly, we see that this pattern is, has been shown again. Okay, but degree centrality calculates the connectivity between one voxel and any other voxel, including direct networks, closer but not direct networks, and distal networks. Since one voxel has higher coherence with its direct or closer neighbors, it is expectable that degree centrality is largely determined by local and nearby connectivity. For this reason, we wanted to explore the dynamics of the resting state networks by another metrics, such as regional homogeneity. And we choose regio because it is very local. I mean, it calculates the connectivity between one voxel and its immediate, direct, or next neighbor. The question behind this comparison is whether the result of both metrics are similar or not. So for that, we just again took the data and we made a pre-processing again procedure, but in this case we just skipped the last step. I mean, we could not smooth the data, because if data is smoothed, there will be an artificial increase of the coherence between the voxels, I'm sorry, and the output will be a man-made or an artificial high Riho value. So we just made this preprocessing again with this exception, and we took the exactly IFG again as a ROI. We extracted the time series, and what we found was no evidence about the interaction between transient motion and time in Riho at ROI level, such as we can appreciate here in this plot. Finally, after this scanner, we made we also implemented a postdoc test so that to measure the effect of the movies on the subjects, so that the subjects answered 8 questions after this scan session, and these questions correspond to these categories, these 8 categories. Well, and we just made one more parity test in order to compare the difference, to establish the difference between neutral and sad movies by all these categories. And then what we made was trying to establish any correlation between the degree centrality values and this behavioral validation, and we found that only 4 of these 8 categories had certain correlation with degree centrality values. I'm talking about the pleasantness, sad, positive other perspective, and positive self perspective. Well, as a conclusions, we can say that first, there is a dependency of the low frequency oscillatory dynamics of resting state networks. We demonstrated that transient emotions have effects on the subsequent brain states. Also, that the second conclusion will be that the endogenous dynamics have a recovery with a time scale of minutes. Third, we can say that degree centrality as a functional connectivity index provides information about both local and distal connectivity. And fourth, and the last conclusion will be that this study has compatibility with other studies that, for instance, they measure the Hertz response to an exercise stress test, and with behavioral evidence of lasting consequence of short-lived emotions on subsequent cognitive performance, sleep, and mood. Okay, thank you very much.